And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to work with examples in the long-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. So we start up here with a real-world event. And my real-world event is a decrease in unemployment insurance. A decrease in unemployment insurance. So what we do always when we get a real-world event is we go and we check our list of determinants on the aggregate demand side and on the aggregate supply side. So we had a list of determinants on the aggregate demand side, and we said those determinants were the same as the determinants on the aggregate expenditure curve. They were all the things that changed: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. And then the things that shift the long-run aggregate supply curve, they were all the things that shifted the production possibilities curve. They were things like changes in labor, land, capital, entrepreneurial skills, or technology. So we got to take this real-world event, and we have to say which one of those determinants do we think that it matches up with. So I'm going to argue that this one, there's more than one answer to this one, but I'm going to argue that this would be a change in labor on the aggregate supply side. So I'm going to make a very classical economic kind of argument here. And how do I know it's a classical argument? Well, a Keynesian argument is usually going to be on the aggregate demand side. The classical arguments are typically going to be on the aggregate supply side. So did I say that wrong? Let me say that again just in case. The Keynesian arguments are going to be on the aggregate demand side, and the classical economists are going to tend to argue on the aggregate supply side. So I'm going to make an aggregate supply argument here. I'm going to say that this is going to be a change in labor on the aggregate supply side. So this is going to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve because of a change in labor. It's going to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve because of a change in labor. So if you decrease unemployment insurance, now we could make a lot of arguments in favor of unemployment insurance. And what I mean by this essentially is what most people call welfare is what I mean when I say unemployment insurance. So if the government decreases the welfare that it offers, if it decreases unemployment insurance by reducing the number of dollars that it gives people who lose their jobs, or reduces the amount of time that people collect a check from the government when they lose their job, if that happens, that's going to encourage people to go out and find another job more quickly. I mean, after all, if I lose my job, and let's say I lose my job, and the government's going to pay for 2/3 of my income they're going to replace with unemployment insurance. Well, I can be a little slower about getting another job. I can kind of take my time a little bit, and therefore I'll be unemployed for a longer period of time. Whereas if I get less unemployment insurance, maybe I only get 25% of my pay in the form of welfare, then I better hustle a little bit, and I better go get another job because I have bills to pay, I got mortgage to pay, and things like that. So this encourages people to go find a job more quickly. All right. Now, again, there are some arguments in favor of having higher welfare. And we might talk about those at another time. Right now, I'm just making this classical argument that if you decrease unemployment insurance, that will change labor because it will encourage people to go find another job more quickly. And if that's encouraging people to work more, then that's going to cause the long-run aggregate supply curve to shift out to the right. That's going to cause the long-run aggregate supply curve to shift out to the right. And again, I want to emphasize this is a very Keynesian, a very classical idea. We will make the Keynesian arguments later. Okay, we will get to the Keynesian arguments. Right now I'm making a very classical argument. So that doesn't mean that it's true. It just means this is the classical argument. So we get a change in labor. People are going to work more. And the long-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift out to the right. When it does, the easy thing to do is to say, okay, that means that prices are going to go down and that means gross domestic product is going to go up. So you would get a decrease in the price level, you would get an increase in the real gross domestic product, and unemployment will do the opposite. You'll get a decrease in unemployment, Now, let's say a little bit more about the details of this. Let's go into some of the details. So the details might look like this. We had our number one, our original equilibrium. We were right here. Number two, we had a shift in the long-run aggregate supply side, and that was because of a change in labor, people willing to, or at least under pressure to work harder than they did before. So number one, we had the original equilibrium. Number two, we get the shift in the curve. And then number three, really that shift in the curve is really going to do this. It's going to move us along that aggregate demand curve. Why is it going to move us along the aggregate demand curve? That's going to be number three. It's going to move us along the aggregate demand curve because as prices begin to decline, that's going to cause the wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and the exchange rate effect to kick in. Okay, so we talked about those on a previous video. As prices go down, my real wealth is going to rise, and therefore I'm going to engage in more consumption. There's the more consumption. Okay, that arrow is not pointing down, it's pointing to the right. There's my increase in consumption. Here's my increase in consumption. And then the interest rate effect says if prices go down, then that means that I can save more. I don't need as much money in my pocket to buy goods and services. I can afford them with less money, so I can save more, and that means interest rates will go down, and that will mean that investment will rise. So you get an increase in investment, moving you along that aggregate demand curve. And then finally, the exchange rate effect, and I'm sorry if this is, I can't tell if this is covered up here. The exchange rate effect is what that is supposed to say. And the exchange rate effect says if prices go down in the United States, people are going to buy more of our goods. That means our exports go up. That means our net exports are going to go up. That means increase in net exports. And so this all has to match up, right? That increase in production on the long-run aggregate supply side has to be matched up by an increase in spending. In this case, it is, with an increase in consumption, investment, and net exports. So we have the story of shifting the curve, and then we have the story of moving along the aggregate demand curve. And so again, this is a very classical story. From the classical economist point of view, you could decrease unemployment insurance, encourage people to work more. That will lower prices, increase gross domestic product, and decrease unemployment. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.